Hey everybody, welcome back to Two Guys, a Girl in F1. Today I'm flying solo. Sabrina's not joining us, but I am going to do my British Grand Prix preview, talking a little bit about Silverstone, the history of the track, how it came to be, kind of what to expect this weekend, and then we're going to talk about potential outcomes for this weekend, and of course the big news, which is it's sounding more and more real, like Max Verstappen may very well be headed off to Mercedes. Still don't totally believe that, but anyway, that's the story. Let's talk a little bit about Silverstone. It was founded actually as a bomber base for World War II, as a training facility more than anything else. It opened in 1943 and was closed in 1946. The war was over. They weren't training as many pilots. And so Silverstone basically was unused, and it was laid out very much like your typical World War II airport that you see scattered all over the United States even today. These airports were laid out in the shape of a large triangle, and Silverstone was no different. It had taxiways and support roads and all that sort of thing, but the three runways were all set up in a triangle. And so after the war, a group of wealthy enthusiasts who had mothballed their race cars during the war brought them out of hibernation basically, and set up a race. And in 1948, they had a race that, it was in 1947 they had this race. And then in 1948, the Royal Automobile Club of Great Britain took over the running of that track. And interestingly enough, they had the first British Grand Prix there in 1948. And then in 1950, they hosted the British Grand Prix again, but this time, this race was a part of the very first official FIA World Championship for Formula One. And so, very historical track. Basically, back in those days, that it was basically used as a very fast flowing track, using basically the three runways of that triangle that we were talking about. And so anyway, the track basically stayed the same as the years went on. Interestingly enough, there were two other circuits from about 1950 to about 1990 that also hosted the British Grand Prix besides Silverstone. One was Brands Hatch, the other one was Donington Park. And over time, the race itself outgrew the facilities that could be offered by Brands Hatch and Donington Park. But Silverstone, being laid out on an airfield, lots of room. There was plenty of space to add more paddock space, more grandstands, more parking, all the things that you would expect to see from a modern circuit. And so there was modifications made to the circuit at various times. The cars were getting faster and faster, and so they added a couple of chicanes to slow the cars down and all that. But really, there really wasn't anything that could be done to slow the nature of the circuit down just because of the way it was initially designed. And so in 1991, they had to change it because the cars had just simply gotten too fast for that circuit. It was too dangerous. And so they lengthened the track, but they also added a lot of additional corners to the circuit, and then reopened. And then in 1994, following the wake of the deaths of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger at Imola, they made some more changes to make the track even more safe. So from that point on, really, the British Grand Prix had found its home at Silverstone. To this day, they continue to improve it. The races are still run by the Royal Automobile Club. Really about the only thing that has changed in recent years is that the track was resurfaced in 2019 for the 2019 race. There had been a problem with the previous paving that was done there. It didn't drain off water very well, and as a result, they had to go back in, brought in a different paving company, repaved the track, and that's what we have today. So the surface that they'll be racing on, this will be the sixth Grand Prix in dozens of other, lesser events since that repaving. So, I would imagine the surface is starting to kind of feel the use of all those cars pounding around it. And then to say nothing of the heating and cooling just going from summer to winter. So it may be that they are looking at another resurfacing here in another few years. Just some particulars about the track, just so you know kind of what you're looking at. The track itself is about 3.7 miles long. The race will be 52 laps, or about 190 miles. The qualifying record there was set in 2020 by Lewis Hamilton. Interestingly enough, they've run 4 races since then, especially with the new ground effects cars and all that, and yet the track record dates back to 2020. And Lewis Hamilton set a 124.3. So that's a number to remember when you're watching quali. Can anybody get close to the 124.3 or break it? We'll see. The race record was set by Max Verstappen same year, 2020, that Lewis set his pole time. Max's race lap was about 2.7 seconds slower in the race than what Lewis qualified at. Max's time was a 127 flat, call it, 127.1 thereabouts. So it'll be interesting to see what the race pace looks like. Top speed is about 203 miles an hour. The cars are at full throttle for about 70% of the lap, which is pretty significant. And you would think that with that's a high-speed track. You would think that it would be a low to medium downforce setup that they would want for the cars. But it turns out they're saying that no, really, Silverstone is a high downforce track because of all the very high-speed corners where you have these rapid changes of direction. You need lots of grip. So you're compromising straight line performance for more speed in the corners. So I thought that was really interesting. And also there's about 40 gear changes a lap. And then from a strategy perspective, I think the important thing to remember here is from the time you pull off the track and enter pit lane, go in, make your pit stop, pull on a new set of tires, and go out. Assuming all goes well, you're looking at a pit stop of around 21 to 22 seconds. So that will be really interesting to see when teams start pulling their cars in for a pit stop. Who's going to drop down how many places, or does somebody have a big enough lead that they can pit and resume racing and still be in front? So, keep that one in mind. 21 to 22 seconds is about what they're looking at. I think it's also interesting. There's a lot of interesting names around this track. And I've kind of wondered where the names came from and never really took the time to go and research it until today. And I thought I'd share just a few of them with you. One is there's a couple of corners called Abbey and Luffield. And it turns out there was a Luffield Abbey, the remains of which were discovered about 200 meters away from Stowe Corner. So there really was this Luffield Abbey. Then there's Beckett's and Chapel Curves. Turns out, kind of a common thread with Abbey and Luffield, the ruins of the Chapel of Thomas Becket lie close to the circuit. Club Corner was named in honor of the Royal Automobile Club. Woodcote is in honor of a country club in Surrey named Woodcote Park. Hangar Straight kind of makes sense. There were 2 aircraft hangars that originally lined the circuit down Hangar Straight, and so they named it Hangar Straight back in probably, the late 40s or early 50s, and that name has always stuck ever since then. Wellington Straight is named after the Vickers Wellington bombers that were based at the RAF Silverstone base back during World War II. And Brooklands is, that corner is named after the first purpose-built circuit that was there in England. Look it up. Brooklands was a very, very interesting high-speed track back in the day. And so, just a nice tip of the hat towards the history of motorsport in the UK. So with all that said, who do I think is going to win this year? Well, I'm going to play the bet really safe and say that it's going to be a win for McLaren. Take your pick whether you're going to vote for Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri. I think, you know, you can't ever count out Max Verstappen. No telling what he might pull out of the bag. Ferrari might have a surprise for us. But, you know, another one who may be a sleeper here is George Russell. I've said it before. I'll say it again. George has been sneakily consistent. And when the temperatures and the circuit suit his Mercedes, he's right there and a threat to win. Now, Europe has been undergoing a heat wave, and it's become very clear for the last several years, the Mercedes ground effect car does not like warm weather. But if the weather were to revert back to a more normal English winter, or a winter, what am I saying? A normal English summer, hey, you know what? George might be a contender. And let's not forget, Lewis Hamilton won there for Mercedes last year. So it's very possible that if the weather cooperates, George might be in the mix of having a good shot at winning. Another thing that's going to be interesting, I don't think they're going to be contenders to win, but maybe we'll see the midfield get even more competitive because Aston Martin is bringing a huge upgrade package for this race, and assuming it does provide a step forward. And remember, they now have that new wind tunnel going full bore. This package is a direct result of development work that they've done in that tunnel. So it could very well be that they've got an effective upgrade package. And we remember what happened with McLaren last year in Miami. It was such a step forward that nobody is able to catch them up. Now, I don't think Aston Martin's going to take that big of a step forward, but if it improves their car by 3 or 4 tenths of a second, they're going to be really close to challenging. So I think it's possible that we could see Fernando Alonso starting to put pressure on the top 4 teams. And I'd also look for Williams to rebound from really what has been surprisingly dismal outings in their last 2 races in Canada and Austria. And you would think, given the nature of Silverstone, that Williams was going to be quick there. So we'll see. And, of course, last but not least is the big news that, man, there are so many rumors flying around talking about Max leaving Red Bull for Mercedes. And if he does, man, that's going to throw the driver market into an absolute tizzy. So if Max moves, who will go where? You know, I mean, is Toto going to get rid of George after spending millions on developing George's career? Or is he going to stay loyal to Kimi Antonelli, who he's kind of developing at least a favorite uncle to favorite nephew kind of relationship, if not father to son? I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating weekend, both on track and off track. Formula One is never short on drama, that's for sure. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the race. We'll be back at you with our race notes early next week. And until then, we'll be talking soon.